When doing therapy, have you ever considered whose ideas and words are actually coming out of your mouth? Come on. Questions and statements such as, I wonder if this is what you feel. Or, you seem depressed. Now, I get trying to be inquisitive and learning to talk, air quotes, therapeutically. However, by whose standards? And how might those interactions in the therapeutic relationship feel fake for both ourselves and our clients who hold a marginalized identity? Welcome to People of Color in Psychology, the show that explores mental health topics specific to culture, diversity, and communities of color. I am your host, Jack Sen. I'm pleased to introduce our guest today, Kimberly Parker, a licensed professional counselor and supervisor, a licensed chemical dependency counselor, a speaker, and owner of Revive to Thrive Wellness Center based out of Dallas, Texas. Kimberly is also in the PhD counseling program and is expected to graduate in summer 2025. Kimberly has specialized training in CPT and EMDR, and notably helps clients who struggle with anxiety, depression, trauma, and persistent grief. Simultaneously, Kimberly realized the need to decolonize psychotherapy's history, and as such, she also integrates the intersections of cultural humility, ancestral healing traditions, and systemic advocacy. In addition to her clinical work, Kimberly is an approved counselor education provider with the National Board of Certified Counselors and has taught several continuing education courses with topics ranging from infusing CBT techniques into nurse practitioner medication visits and elevating counselor awareness, a guide to critical consciousness, all of which focuses on cultural humility in clinical care. In December 2024, Kimberly became a Goldman Sachs Black in Business graduate from 1 Million Black Women in Business. And previously, she was an awardee of the Chi Sigma Iota International Honor Society in Counseling's Outstanding Practitioner Award in 2022 and Toll House Graduate School Academic Achievement Award in 2021 and 2022. As a Black licensed professional counselor and supervisor, Kimberly will be sharing with us a personal process of decolonizing psychotherapy and some takeaways that she's learned. Kimberly, thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Jack. I really appreciate you so much for providing the opportunity and also for creating such a needed platform for such important topics.
Yeah, thanks so much for being on our show today because this is a very personal conversation that we're going to have today. We're talking about your experience in navigating in that developmental process of decolonizing psychotherapy. First of all, for our listeners who may be curious about the definition, share with us how you would define decolonizing psychotherapy.
Absolutely. My explanation, I'll try to make it as clear and concise as possible. I think back to just the counseling field in general, that in this realization, I'm sure we'll get into a little bit later, that everything that literally the entire field is embedded in Eurocentric values is essentially what I gather from decolonization is that first starting off with how colonized things are in the sense that the teaching pedagogy, the supervision models, and the actual counseling theories that we learn are based in Eurocentric values. So when I think of decolonizing therapy, I think at first coming to that acknowledgement that the work that we do and what we've learned essentially is embedded in colonial values and colonialism. And I also think about, when I think of decolonizing, deconstructing. And that has been a very interesting process in the sense of maybe not everything is in alignment as it relates to transforming from these colonial practices that can be and have been harmful to clients with marginalized backgrounds. So it's about this piece of realizing, like, what is harmful, what is helpful, what do I keep, what do I do away with, and what new tools do I need to learn in order to practice in a way that is decolonized? And so that I'm sure Dr. Jennifer Mullan, I know she does, the author of Decolonizing Therapy, would define that in a more eloquent way or a more concise way. But that's how I make sense of it in my mind, is that I'm looking at the foundation, which is Eurocentric in nature. I'm figuring out what still fits and what doesn't, doing away with no longer serves my client well, and learning new ways of offering therapy that are helpful and that are safe.
Yeah, thank you for that personal definition, because I do think
absolutely
we can have people refer to many definitions in
Mhm.
terms of the origin. So Dr. Jennifer Mullan, we can actually include that in our show notes.
Wonderful. Okay.
Yeah, and you know, part of it is also integrating understanding when we interpret or when we read people's definition. How do we make sense of it for ourselves? So, in thinking about this idea of decolonizing psychotherapy, can you walk us through that journey for you? Because I mean, you've done CPT, EMDR, right? A lot of evidence-based practices, for the most part, have been disseminated and taught and constructed in a way where the investigators are oftentimes white. Most of the subject or patient population that are studied are mostly white as well.
Absolutely.
And there is this philosophy that we are trying to, so it feels as though we're trying to sort of put people in this normative approach. Yeah. So walk us through this personal journey of when that realization started to hit that this isn't working.
Absolutely. Yeah. Such a great question. So I think back to my master's in counseling program, and how I would say that I was very, very grateful to have diverse faculty around me. However, the program was predominantly white as it relates to my colleagues, which, I mean, the field is predominantly white, so that makes sense. So I found myself feeling very othered and just like not fitting in, to be quite frank. And it wasn't until maybe the middle or end portion of the counseling program that I found a few brown and Black folks, and we started calling ourselves the clinicians of color. And so, and then I started thinking, oh, it might be cool to be a Black counselor. Like, after all, like, maybe this is a cool thing to be a clinician of color. And so I started feeling, okay, less othered, but I still knew that something wasn't fitting. And so I went on to work for a few years in the field at pretty much every level of care, and really got some great experience. And then in 2021, I started the doc program. And here I am again, diverse faculty, super duper grateful for that. But I was the only, and I am the only Black person in my cohort. And so that othering feeling started to come about again. And it was the second year of my doctoral program. I was working on a research project with a colleague, and her focus was on Black counseling students or master level students. And I came across the words on a transcript that said, I learned how to counsel like a white woman. And those words, it was like, I felt like I was in the Matrix almost, in the sense of everything started coming together. All the puzzle pieces that were in my brain, they all just started coming together. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I also learned how to counsel like a white woman, you know? And that's where this feeling of like othering was. I was trying to fit into that norm that you spoke of. And that wasn't it, because I'm not white, right? And so just how simple these words were. It was just one sentence that I'll never forget, really changed my life. Because when I first started the doc program, I had transformed from being like strictly CBT to being what I would call, I was like, I want to be humanistic CBTer, you know, is what I was calling myself. And then I looked at the tenets of both of those. I kind of did a side by side, and I was like, the tenets are so opposing. I don't think that's it. Like, it still didn't fit for me. And so I realized, okay, maybe I want to do more of a culturally responsive CBT. And I think that's because there's a huge part of me that still very much so conceptualizes my client from a CBT lens. I do believe that we have bad things in life that happen that make us have certain thoughts that impact how we feel and how we behave. I do still very much so conceptualize my client in that form and fashion. And I just believe the road to healing can and should look different, because we know some of the main ins and outs of CBT can be and have been very harmful to marginalized folks. For example, trying to get someone to reconstruct a thought that is connected to oppression. And so, no, I'm not going to tell a Black woman or a trans man that we need to reconstruct this thought about what they're experiencing at work, the microaggressions and the macroaggressions. I'm not going to do that. And I think that if you look at CBT in its most rawest form, very manualized, very white, that doesn't fit the type of client that I meet with. Even if my client does come from a Caucasian or European background, knowing that there's trauma there, knowing that there might even be some generational trauma there, it just is not sufficient. And so this journey has very much so looked like going from straight CBT, because, you got to pick a theory when you're a master's student and have your guiding theory, and transform to me wanting to be a humanistic CBTer to now a little bit more of a culturally responsive CBTer, to my biggest goal would be a politicized healer. And this all stems from, again, my personal experiences that led up to me reading those words. I learned how to counsel like a white woman. That made me realize, as a counselor, educator in training, that it's not just the theories that we learn, but as I mentioned before, the supervision models and the actual teaching pedagogy that are also embedded in Eurocentric values. It's really charged me up in a positive way to see, okay, how can we make things better? How can I decolonize my therapy practice and become a politicized healer so that I can help bring more healing to people that look like me, that are from marginalized backgrounds, and lead to less dropouts so that we can get more healing in our communities?
Thanks for sharing that. It's as you were talking about, the cognitive restructuring,
Mhm.
it is difficult to use that word because, one, it's very academic, very dry.
Absolutely.
And what do you mean you want me to cognitively restructure the racist environment that I may be subjected to, or
Exactly.
biases that maybe some of my colleagues? Now, we all have biases. I want to acknowledge that. We are all in a working progress.
Exactly.
So as you're going through this process,
Mhm.
I hear that
Mhm.
you're beginning to integrate
Yes.
ideas in terms of what makes sense. You're not throwing out completely the CBT work, because there are some
Yes.
utility, there are some benefits to it. There are some ideas that, okay, this makes sense. However,
Absolutely.
not all of it. How can I take what makes sense for me and my
Exactly.
clients that I'm working with and then
Yes.
apply it for them? So I'm actually curious about this when you gave the example of the current mentoring and teaching pedagogy type of a
Mhm.
framework, how that in itself is also a very colonial system and is oppressive in a way.
Yes.
I have some thoughts about it. I'm curious to hear from you what you are identifying as the pitfall there.
Absolutely, for sure. So, yeah, it's just when I looked at it again, just the literature in its rawest form, and I think I want to put a note out there that while I do think that the supervision models, the teaching pedagogy, and the counseling theories are embedded in Eurocentric values, I have the luxury of going into a doc program and learning from people that are relentless about multicultural counseling. And so I have been very fortunate in that sense. I think of, one person in particular that comes to my mind, Dr. Peggy Ceballos. I mean, we call her the multicultural guru. If I ever had a trouble in that realm, whether I was teaching and dealing with racism or wanting to know how to handle this situation with a client, she just, oh my gosh, just was such a safe place to land. So I want to put it out there that yes, that is the foundation. However, I was able to see this even clearer because I had a professor that was willing to touch on this topic of Eurocentric values in our field and infusing multiculturalism. And so I think it is a pitfall, because when I think of my program in particular, in which I love my program. That's why I decided to go back to get a PhD there. I got my master's there, and then I decided, let me come back 4 years, and just have a good time, but you've got to choose one of the mainstream theories. And what does that look like? Person-centered, CBT, existentialism, right? And so this is when I think of the pitfall, and I was just talking to a colleague about this, is I've been talking to her about how do I address the tension of knowing what I know while also trying to respect the development of the students and the curriculum that, is where KCREP values our foundations, rather, requirements are embedded into the curriculum. So we were talking about how to address that tension, knowing what I know with knowing what is required. And I'm thinking for me, that's a pitfall, but I don't know if that's exactly where you were going with that question. So
that totally makes sense, because you're beginning to connect the dots where, for example, some programs are APA accredited, KCREP accredited, and there are certain courses and content that needs to be taught. And oftentimes with faculty profiles, there's a preference in terms of theoretical model. And like you named some of the key ones. Rarely do we explore, maybe someone is in a different, culturally informed practice, or I don't even know what other model are named. For instance, is a faculty member going to put down decolonizing psychotherapy practices? I don't know what the formal word is.
I've never heard it. I don't know that anyone's ever explicitly, personally, and I haven't looked into every program, but I don't know that anyone's used that terminology. If anything, I think it's like multicultural counseling or something to that effect.
Yeah, so it's like, we do see some faculty members put multicultural counseling.
Yes.
And well, I think we can do better. Let's go beyond multicultural counseling, because it's almost as though anything that is diversity related gets lumped into multicultural counseling.
Exactly.
And you lose the nuance and the specialty of each theoretical approach. Like what if we put down, Janet Helm's racial identity model, right? That'd be great.
Exactly.
Just put something specific. So as you were going through this process, you're connecting the dots, the courses that are being taught. Okay, I see it. I see what you're referring to. Yeah,
absolutely. And if I could just circle back to what you mentioned about how beautiful it would be for us to be more explicit with like course titles and course descriptions. I'm thinking about a very humbling experience I recently had. Actually, it's happened since we last met. So this is just within the last few weeks, where I had been saying, I always give credit where credit is due. So, in counseling, we've got our 5 forces of counseling. The first 3 forces consist of our mainstream theories, and then the MCCs for our 4th force, and the MSJCCs for our 5th force. And what I was saying about Sue and colleagues and Rats and colleagues is that in some form and fashion, I thought, are we putting lipstick on a pig? In the sense of adding these as supplements, the MCCs and the MSJCCs, to something that is at the foundation colonial. But then I flash forward to 2025 and the doing away with DEI, and realize that these pioneers who are still working so hard in our field had to be very creative with how they worded things to still get the mission across. And so I think that's why we don't see explicit terms like decolonizing this and, deconstructing this, because some things, especially if we flash, back to 1992, I think it was, when we got our MCCs, that I'm sure it would not be cool to say we're decolonizing therapy. I don't know that it would be cool or acceptable. And so that was a very, very, very humbling experience that I've had, is, oh my gosh, they were so creative. They are so creative to get the job done, again, so that our people can get healing, and that they can work within a system that is so resistant to us doing this type of work.
the work that they were doing, they had to essentially use code, very subtle. We can't explicitly state things, and there's definitely pros and cons to that, but that was
Yeah.
needed in order to basically transmit these theories so that they're available. And
Yes.
now we are here today. So there was something else I was going to
Yeah.
point out that based on, what you mentioned in terms of your journey and noticing the different theories and the teaching models. Oh, and the mentoring. I think, a reaction that I had is it is very individualistic, which again, that in itself is a very Eurocentric value. And imagine if you do this individual supervision the whole time and you're the only faculty of color, that's what's perpetuating the burnout. So then it's like you're assigning all the students of color to this one faculty of color, and they're going to get burned out. And so this individualized approach to mentoring, to doing research, it is tough.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And my heart goes out so much to faculty of color, because I know, okay, the research says, right, mentorship is essential for us to matriculate throughout the program as students. So I get that. And you're right, when you're that faculty of color that needs to teach the diversity class, because that's the class they always give you. And then, I'm not even going to go down that route of the what I felt like I experienced is trauma due to the racism that I experienced of being a Black female faculty teaching diversity. Probably one of the most trying experiences I had throughout this entire journey so far. So coupling that with now I need to mentor, like you mentioned, all the students of color. How do I stay in this job? How do I stay encouraged? And then again, what does it mean? Because for so many students, I don't know how many times I've had it, and I'm grateful for it, that the student came up to me and said, oh my gosh, I'm so glad I had a professor that looked like you that was teaching my class today. But what if I get burnt out? How can I stay? How can I teach? How can I be this light for this student who finally feels seen? It feels very trying. It feels like, how to address that. And then I can use the word self-care, but I heard it so beautifully stated last week. I think it was by Linda Ty. She's doing it's a facilitator that's doing a somatic training. And she says, we can't use self-care to heal systemic issues. And I think that just landed on me so right, because I was thinking, wow, we can't self-care our way out of some of the things we are dealing with.
Yeah. That, in fact, goes against the philosophy that this is a system issue. So I'm going to blame myself. I got to put the whole responsibility on myself, as opposed to this is a collective experience. We need to reach out. We need to help others address the system. We need to look both ways, inwards and outwards, both, not just the self. Okay. So Kimberly, based on your journey, what would be some takeaway tips as people are thinking and deconstructing therapy? What would you recommend, just in terms of your personal experience?
Absolutely. I think it's to, like you mentioned, start with self. I think we've got to start. I always like to start there. Start with self first, and really think about why you're doing what you're doing. For me, that was a hard question, because now I have to think about, oh my gosh, I've invested so much time and money in some things that I don't even believe anymore. And so that was a little bit of a hard pill to swallow. And so, but being okay with it, because it's all about the end game. It's all about the outcome, which for me would be, again, bringing more healing to marginalized folk. And so with that being said, looking at self and critically examining that, because that's what we're really called to do. When I think about, I take myself back to that theories class. I said, critically think about this. But no, I wanted, as a novice counselor, as an early student, I need to know exactly what to do and how to do it. And I want to follow it just like that. I want to watch the videos of Dr. Beck and see how to do this, right? So to really get in there and critically examine why we're doing what we're doing, and then start to filter out what fits and what doesn't fit. Dr. Pamela Hayes has also been very instrumental in my journey, as she outlines, right, how to practice CBT in a more culturally responsive way. And for me, that's what started to get the wheels turning. And that's what started to help me see, this is unhelpful, some of this that I'm doing. Even the wording, I don't even use cognitive restructure anymore. I ask something like, how can we find a more compassionate thought? Is maybe a question a more helpful thought. Not a negative thought. Let's not call it that. Let's call it an unhelpful thought. And then again, not restructuring things that are connected to oppression, because that's harmful. So really starting to examine why I'm doing what I'm doing, what is helpful and harmful to my client, and what work do I still need to do. And so that's where I have found myself. As it relates to decolonizing therapy, a lot of it is to take ourselves back to our ancestral roots. I realized just how much I don't know about my ancestral roots. And now that all of my grandparents have passed on, I can't ask them questions. So I've got to go and do the DNA tests. I've got to try to see if the elders in my family who are in their 60s and 70s might have something that they can share with me, so I can learn more about where I come from. And again, examining, even I'm critically examining the religious aspect of my life that has been taught for so many years. Why do I do this? Why? And sure, I've taken world religion courses, right? But then now I'm trying to figure out which parts of my religion which parts were maybe ripped from me because we were told that they were bad or of the devil, versus which parts are a part of my identity that I don't even know about, and my ancestors. And so I think it starts with this self, and like, who am I? And then what am I doing, and why am I doing what I'm doing? What is helpful? What is harmful? What do I need to do away with? And then remaining culturally humble, not culturally competent. How could we ever be competent in this? I mean, we're always learning, we're always evolving. And so remaining open. And I think it's a cycle. Once I start here and I examine this and go through the cycle, then now I start going through the next cycle with this next thing that I'm examining, and being okay with that. Because I think for a lot of us therapists, counselors, psychologists, it's like, a lot of us can be scholars and we just want to know the end game. We want to know how to get the A. We want to know where we can arrive. With cultural competency, it sounded like there was a place to arrive, but with cultural humility, I think we learned that we'll never arrive, that we're always evolving, always learning, always failing, because I will have cultural ruptures, because I'm not perfect, because of those biases that I'm always going to try to continuously examine. And so that's a super long-winded answer, but that's what next steps look like for me, is looking at self, taking a deep dive, what fits, what doesn't fit, and just keep that cycle going as you go and address the various aspects of your work and the various aspects of yourself.
And as you continue to go, you are questioning, does this fit? Does this not fit? Where did I arrive at that? There's a feedback loop of evaluation. You're not taking it at face value. Where's this coming from? So there's an active engagement in the material. The materials, the teaching, also with the people you interact with, because I suspect the more people you interact with, the more you're also going to learn. So we're seeing this knowledge beyond just the textbook.
Yes.
Yeah.
100%. I say you can't intellect your way into cultural humility. You can't. And so, I know I have that urge, I'm like, ooh, just let me go. I have all these.
It would be easy, right? Yeah. Yeah. So now, can you share with us any memorable events and circumstances that influenced how you got into this work?
Absolutely. Yes. So I take it all the way back to I just had the best grandparents ever. I take it back to really, really early days where I didn't know what I was going to do. I was just a kid. And my grandmother Grace, she used to take us to I lived in California for most of my life. So she would take us to the downtown area of San Diego, and we would feed those who were displaced. And I don't know if I put two and two together at the time, but one of my uncles who was struggling with substance use at the time, he was on the streets. And so it was also my grandmother's way of making sure that my uncle ate. And she would go and she would pray for the people. My grandmother was a clergywoman. And so she would go, she would pray for them, and she would love on them. And I would see her hug people that people probably wouldn't even, get 10 feet close to. And it showed me the true essence of loving people who were different and who were misfits and who were looked down upon. And so at a very early age, I realized the differences between those who fit in versus those who didn't. And I knew I wanted to help people. And so then, of course, you get older and you start watching TV and stuff. And so I was like, I want to be a doctor because I can make money and help people. And then I was like, I want to be a dentist because I didn't like the classes for being a doctor, but then I didn't like the classes for being a dentist either. And so I was like, okay, I don't know what I'm going to do. And somehow I stumbled across psychology. And I was in a group counseling class with Dr. Stephen Freeze at the time. And the first day of class just like shook something up in my bones. It was an intro to group counseling class. I looked around the room and I realized that everyone had so much pain, and that was their motivation to want to help people. And so that put it in my brain that I wanted to be like a clinical psychologist because that's what I knew at the time. So I went on to get my master's in psychology, and from there, I felt like I don't know what to do next. I was going to go into a clinical psychology program, an accelerated program, but then I found out the campus that I was going to go to wasn't accredited. And so it was either move to Chicago or do something else. And so I found myself at the university I was working at the time. I met with the head of the psychology department, and he took some time to speak with me, which was so kind of him. And he's like, have you ever thought about getting a master's in counseling? That was Dr. Fred Rabinowitz. And I was like, who gets two masters is what I was thinking. But then I thought, hey, what the heck, And so I applied to 2 counseling programs in Texas, and I got into the UNT program, and the rest was history in regards to just what came next. I was meeting the right people at the right time and strengthening my skill in counseling and caring for people. And then I decided that I wanted to go further because I really wanted to be able to create a seat at the table for myself and for others who look like me. But I've recently been told that a seat at the table isn't good enough. We need the structure, and we need the land that the structure was built on. But I'll save that for another day. But yeah, that's how it's really all evolved for me, is that there were people that were treasures, all starting off with my grandmother Grace, and different people that poured into my life that helped me get to this place that I had no clue I would never, coming from a place of being displaced myself and facing various insecurities, I would never imagine that this is where my life would be today.
It's the compassion that you witnessed from your grandmother.
Yes.
That life force, that compassion, as you were describing that experience, there's so much love, so much warmth.
Absolutely.
And that carryover of her interaction with your uncle, that idea of care, radical self-care, radical care of others, radical healing of community.
Yes.
That idea that life force essentially continues to help you carry on.
Absolutely.
In this work. Wow. So for you, what were some challenges you faced and overcame that you would be willing to share?
Absolutely. I would say that the challenges, they really have to do with, I would say, my most salient identities being a Black woman, being the only, especially living in California where I lived was mainly a predominantly white area as well. So just these was always taught you got to work this much harder, and you've got to wear your hair like this, and you've got to make sure to be the best dressed, and you've got to talk like this. All these lessons that I learned to survive in a white world. And I know that my mom was doing the best that she can. My parents were doing the best that they can to raise me to survive in a white world. But yeah, I would say that othering experience, and then being earlier on in my racial identity, not realizing how I was on a subconscious level assimilating and over assimilating to fit in, to connect, to not be what they might call a loner, so I didn't tap into my Blackness. I didn't honor my Blackness, because at the time, as I've evolved, I realized that I just didn't think it was cool back then, right? They told me I wasn't white enough for the white folks, but I also wasn't Black enough for the Black folks. And they would call me whitewashed because of the way that I spoke. Again, I'm from the Valley. It's just how I learned how to, talk and live. I was, and so I say all that to say that I don't think I can talk about like my professional identity without my racial identity. And that has to do with the challenges that I have experienced in this field. And so, challenge of not knowing self, not accepting self, not honoring self, and then working in white spaces, as a counselor, and at times dealing with exploitation. I heard somebody say, and goodness gracious, I wish I could remember who said it, because I always like to give credit where credit is due. They said something to the effect of, you want my presence, but not my voice. And that is how I felt in a lot of white spaces. And I think back to the time when everything was going on with George Floyd, and I would see my clients, and then as soon as I got off work, I would cry. I wouldn't do my notes because I didn't have it in me. And the place that I was working at the time was like, well, do you want to do a class on this? And I'm thinking, I'm broken. How can I possibly speak on this? Like, can you not take charge and not engage in this exploitive practice by asking me to do something like this at the most painful part of my life? It goes back to the burden of working through racism being placed on the oppressed. And I think that is very, I'm just going to say it. I think it's lazy. I think it's lazy to not do the work and to ask people who have been oppressed to do the work. And we are doing the work. That's the thing. I mean, I think that's how we move forward in a lot of ways, but we can't do this without those who have more privileged identities, especially as it relates to race and ethnicity. So I would say challenges I have faced have to do with me being a Black woman, being the only one in most spaces, dealing with exploitation where my presence is enough, but your voice is too loud, as it relates to advocacy. And that's why at the end of the day, one of the main reasons why I became my own boss, because I thought to myself, I want to be able to create safe spaces for folks where they don't have to deal with exploitation and their voice does matter and they don't feel so othered. And so, yeah, I think those are some of the challenges. I also think back to certain jobs that I had, having clients who were very visibly racist based on like their tattoos and things of that nature. And for some reason, my white bosses thought it was acceptable to assign those clients to me, when again, there's many other therapists that are not therapists of color that could probably serve this person. But I was so naive at the time, I didn't even realize what all those tattoos meant. And I just treated this individual, like,
Gosh. And especially to do that when someone's early on learning as a student, I think we want to be, oh gosh, wow.
Yes, it was a little intense, but I'll tell you, like, some of those experiences, I look back on them now. I think about a really tall guy that was an Aryan brother, and he would tell me, people can't see me out with you because you're Black. I'm an Aryan brother. Like, let's kind of meet in secret in your office. Which, and of course, in my office, nobody's gonna go in there but me and the client. But I remember at graduation, I would always hug my guys when they would graduate. And I did not hug him because I thought, oh my gosh, the other Aryan brothers, I got to be mindful of them. And this client actually ended up hugging me at graduation. And so, I think even with maybe the lack of mindfulness that was happening with management at the time, thinking about what it's like to have this Aryan brother work with this Black woman, so at the time, I guess I was up for a challenge, like you mentioned, being earlier on in my career. Now, I don't know that I have the bandwidth, to be completely honest, because, but at the time, to me, that was a breakthrough in a lot of ways. So something that was maybe meant for bad, or just something that someone wasn't being mindful about, I was able to flip that and make it work, essentially. And I think that's just what we do. We make it work.
Wow. So for you, what does it mean to be a Black counselor?
Mm-hmm. Ooh. Mm. Wow, that's a big question right there. And it's kind of making me a little emotional. I would say, if I'm just kind of speaking freely here, it means to stand in both my strength and my weakness, and knowing that I am a strong Black woman. I am a strong Black counselor, and I am relentless about helping our people heal. And I will go to bat with any trauma, any pain point that my client brings to me. And so standing in the strength of that, while also knowing that at times I am weak. I think you don't hear that a lot about, you always hear the strong Black woman, but I am also a weak Black woman in the sense that I have pain just like anybody else. I have my own counselor just like anybody else. And I will make mistakes just like anybody else. And I need those mistakes to be okay, just like they would be, with anybody else. And so it means being imperfect, but it also means being extremely relentless about healing, standing in the strength of those who have come before me that have dealt with a lot. And I'm thinking about maybe even as, my grandmother passed at 89 just last year. So standing in her strength and the way she loved people so fiercely. Even my tiny grandmother on the other side, just so fierce in her love for her family and how she served people. And so it means being fierce. It means being strong. It means being weak. And it means when I get there, I'm going to bring you with me, because I care about the collective, and I care about us being free of the things that prevent us from living as our best and highest selves.
That is so loving, so powerful.
Thank you. It's a great question. I wasn't ready for that one. That was a great question. But I really believe in being genuine. That's probably my biggest skill that I rely on in living life. Doing this work and living life is being genuine. And so if a tear comes out, a tear comes out. If I stumble, I stumble. And I thank you for that beautiful question. That was a very beautiful and powerful question.
Thank you. And you know your mission. You're not lost.
Absolutely.
In spite of all the taking away, the carving away at your identities early on, it's like you regained the purpose and mission. So, Kimberly, how can we support you?
Wow. Just first and foremost, this platform again is just so wonderful and beautiful. Like when I woke up this morning, I had no clue the healing that was waiting for me in this conversation with you. So this community, this platform is helpful to me. I would also say too, I've got to put out a shameless plug that when I start doing my dissertation data collection, I might need to call up on a few folks to, if they can be participants. That might just be a very logical way of, or logistical way of helping out, because I'm meeting such great people that I'm like, ooh, I need to get your email so you can be my participant one day. So I would say that, and I would say, just again, the community for me is everything. That's how I've decided that, sure, there will be days I will survive in this climate, but I also plan to thrive. And I think that community healing and connection is a huge piece of what supports me and what helps me to keep doing this work. And so that in itself, I would say, the community, this platform, and then my shameless plug about being my participant would probably be my top 3 ways right now to gain support.
Sure. And well, are you in the dissertation data collection level so we can actually include some information for folks?
Not yet. I'm working on my proposal right now. I plan to be done by the end of this semester, but hopefully much earlier. So I'm thinking data collection will start in the summer is hoping.
Well, once you have that, let me know and I'll share it on LinkedIn so
Thank
folks
you
can
so much.
sign up.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. That means a lot. And that's what's going to help me finish this chapter. So that means really everything. Thank you.
Great. Well, Kimberly, I really appreciate this. This has been, I think it's also been healing for myself, and I hope it's been healing for our listeners as well. This is a journey that we don't need to do in isolation.
Exactly. Yeah. Absolutely. I completely agree. And again, I just thank you for this space. I thank you for your bravery in doing this work and allowing me to be here today. I can't thank you enough. And LinkedIn is really my new best friend. Honestly, I came across your post on LinkedIn, and it really has changed my life in these past 3 months. People that I've met through just scrolling on LinkedIn, like, no more Instagram or Facebook for me. LinkedIn is where it's at. I'm telling you.
Yes. All right, Kimberly. Well, again, thank you so much for your time today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jack. I appreciate you.
A huge thank you to our listeners. If you enjoyed this episode, please share and subscribe to People of Color in Psychology. You can also support us by registering for continuing education courses or making a one-time donation on the Multicultural Counseling Institute's website. Your feedback is important to us, so feel free to send an email, a message on LinkedIn, or leave a voice message on our website. Until next time, this is your host, Jack Sun.